Hi everybody, today I'm working on a 2006 Mini Cooper S. This car needs new control arm bushings. Several years ago I made a video where I showed you how to change the bushings with the control arm bushing carriers still attached to the car. Today I'm going to show you how to do it by removing the subframe. And the way you can tell it needs new bushings is if you kick the front tires, they bounce back and forward. This would do this even if it's on the ground, but I forgot to show you before I jacked the car up. On a good Mini, if you kick the tires, it's not going to do hardly anything, but on one with worn bushings, you can see it moving back and forth. This method is good if you're planning to take the subframe out anyway to do some other work, like replacing other ball joints or a clutch job or whatever. I'll put a link in the description where you can get the tools and parts I'm going to be using for this job. For this car, we're going to be installing the PowerFlex polyurethane control arm bushings. These are easy to install. You don't even need a press to do it. You can use a piece of threaded pipe and a couple of nuts to squeeze these back into the control arms brackets. And I'll be using a reciprocating saw to cut the old bushings out of the carriers. This is probably the easiest way to get the bushings out without using a press. Before we start, we're going to want to make sure that the steering wheel is in the center position and locked. First, we'll take off the wheels. Next, we'll loosen the tie rod end. This is a 15 mil socket. Then I'll take a big sledgehammer and hit it, and that'll cause it to pop out. Alright, next underneath there's an 18 mil bolt. I'm going to loosen this bolt but not take it off all the way so I don't damage the threads when I hit it with the giant hammer. Then we hit with the big hammer and eventually it'll pop free. And when I say big hammer, I mean big hammer. And we'll repeat on the other side. Be careful not to hit the brake rotor when you do this. So now we'll take the nut off and pull the control arm out. Now I'm going to go under the car with a 13 mil wrench and a 16 mil socket. On each side I'm going to remove these three subframe 16 mil bolts. Later on I'm going to slide a transmission jack in to lower the subframe. And it's easier to take these bolts out now when the jack's not in the way. Next, I'll disconnect the steering shaft from the power steering rack, and it's held on by a single 13 mil bolt, which has a nylon lock washer, and there's like a slip bolt here. So I'm going to use a ratcheting 13 mil wrench. I'm holding onto the bolt with my other hand so it doesn't turn backward. There's going to be resistance pretty much the entire way out because it's a nylon nut. If you're having trouble getting to this bolt from underneath, you can also reach it from the top by turning the steering wheel 90 degrees, removing the airbox and using a long socket extension and a 13 mil socket. Okay, now I can take it off the rest of the way by hand. I'll push the bolt out. It's a little bit snug. And then I'll just push, and there's like a universal joint here. I'll just push this off and push it up and out of the way. This one's having a little trouble slipping off of the steering rack input thingy, so I'm just going to hit that with a pry bar and a hammer. There it goes. Then I'll fold it up out of the way. So we've taken the back three bolts out. Later on we're going to take this bolt out here, and then there's one more up here, and that'll allow us to get the subframe lowered. Next I'm going to loosen the end link here, and it's held on by a 16mm nut. And then you can use a box wrench 17 mil to keep the inside part from spinning as you turn the outside part. And be sure to do this when both of the front wheels are off the car, otherwise the sway bar is going to be under tension, and that could be very dangerous. So now the strut and the hub assembly is loose and free and clear. Next, I'll take the wheel speed sensor wire out of its little clip here, because this part of the subframe is going to go down when we take the subframe out. Next, we'll take off the bumper. This is held on by 2 Torx 30 screws here, a couple of 8 mil on the outside, upside down. Along the bottom is going to be 3 10 mil, and then there's a couple of Phillips fasteners on both sides. The 3 10 mil bolts are here, here, and here, but on this car they're missing. And I'll take the Phillips head out as well. This screws into the plastic wheel liner. On this side the bolt is wrong. Okay, once I've done that, the bumper is loose and ready to take off. So I'll just kind of pull it forward. Disconnect the electrical clips for the lights. And then on this one there's a ambient temperature sensor, so I'll just take that out of its clip. And we can put the bumper off to the side. Next, I'll remove the crash bumper, and it's held on by a total of 5 13 mil fasteners, 4 nuts and 1 bolt on each side. And we'll tug and take it out of there. Next, there's a couple of 10 mil bolts holding on the front crash tube into the radiator housing. Underneath, there's 2 16 mil bolts on each side. Then we'll tap these out with a hammer. Sometimes this black plastic thing comes out. You can go ahead and throw it away. It's just there to help assemble the car at the factory. Alright, next we'll go back under the car and we'll remove the power steering pump and the lower engine mount. These are both held in by 13 mil bolts. We'll disconnect the wiring. Now the engine's loose. Alright, back up on top, there's one more thing we need to do. We got to fold this heat shield up out of the way. It's just flexible aluminum. Then I'm going to disconnect this 10 mil bolt holding the power steering reservoir in place. Then I'm going to flex this open and push the reservoir down underneath it, because when we lower the subframe, this reservoir is going to come out together with the subframe. That way we don't need to drain the power steering fluid. Also, I'm going to make sure the O2 sensor wire, this white wire here, is out of the way. Sometimes it's clipped onto one of these hoses. I just want to make sure it's not clipped on. Alright, I think we're ready now to get the subframe out. We've disconnected the steering member. We've got the wire loosened so it's not going to get caught here. We've removed the end link and the tie rod end and the outer ball joint. Okay, next I'm going to bring my transmission jack over here. I'll put a link in the description where you can get this. You could also use a regular floor jack, but this is a lot more stable. I'll put a block of wood on it because the car is jacked up fairly high in my case. And just slide it underneath. There's a round spot right here. That's the center of mass of the subframe, so I'm going to line it right under there. I'm going to put all of the weight onto the jack, and then I'll loosen the remaining 4 bolts that are holding the subframe to the car. There are still a couple of wires attached to the power steering pump. We're going to lower the subframe a little bit, and then we'll disconnect those. Okay, so now we can safely remove these last 4 bolts. Alright, the bolts are out, so I'm going to slowly lower the subframe. Just keeping an eye on things and making sure nothing's caught or hung up or I didn't forget anything. Alright, I'm going to stop here and disconnect the wires here for the power steering pump. This one I just unclipped. The other one here, I just have to firmly pull it backward and it'll come out. Just like that. I'll go back up on top to make sure the reservoir is not getting stuck on anything. And I'll do this a couple of times. Now I can continue lowering. I'm going to stop here for a second and put this strap around the subframe so it doesn't slip off of my jack. I'm going to continue lowering it. Okay, now I'm going to wiggle it out the rest of the way, just making sure that this tube here clears the bottom of the engine. And I can pull it out from under the car. This reservoir has a tendency to drip, so I'm going to use a block of wood to just keep it upright. And as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of room under the car now, so if you have any other work to do on the car, now would be a good time. So here's the control arm bushing. And on this car, it's almost totally torn. The rubber's not in good shape at all. Alright, so we'll get these control arms out of here. That requires removing the inner ball joint. These are 16 mil bolts. And the control arm and the sway bar bracket, which are 18 mil. Those are on tight. I'm going to grab the persuader. Easy. Oh yeah, if your car has xenon headlights, there's going to be a connection here for the headlight leveling sensor, so be sure to disconnect that. Alright, now I'll put the control arm into the bench vise. Nice and tight. This is probably going to be really easy to get off, but what I'm going to do is use a couple of pry bars and pry it off. So I'm going to spray a little bit of penetrating oil in here, because what I'm going to try to do is use the pry bars to get this inner bushing to slide off of the control arm shaft here. And if that doesn't work, we can cut it off or grind it off, but that tends to smell a little bit. So I'm going to stick these pry bars in here and try to just get it to slowly come off. So I'm just giving it firm but consistent pressure. And usually I can get it to slide about 2/3 of the way off, and then I can twist it off the rest of the way. And be careful, sometimes these pry bars will slip and you'll go flying. once I've made it that far, oh boy, this is totally separated. Usually what happens is I can grab onto this thing and I'll twist it off the rest of the way. But this one, it just came clean off because it's completely shot. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to use this plumbing wrench here and try to twist it off the rest of the way. Yeah, that seems to work. I'm just going to kind of twist and pull. There we go. Came clean off. Next we need to get this piece out. And the easiest way to get it out is to cut it out with a reciprocating saw. If you have a hydraulic press, you can also press it out. But that can be a little tricky because this edge here is kind of thin, and sometimes the press tool tries to go inside instead of on top. And there's a couple layers I need to cut through. First I need this hard plastic layer to come out, and then inside there's this metal ring, and I'm going to cut it, try to cut it as straight as possible. I'm just going to make a cut to release the tension, and then this inner ring should fall right out. So I'll use a reciprocating saw with a bimetal blade and just cut straight through it. And I'll make a couple of cuts. I'll make one cut and then I'll make a relief cut next to it, so this plastic piece should flop right out. Okay, so now we can see the metal outside part. I'm trying to hold the saw as even as possible so I don't cut into the carrier bracket too much. It looks like this part's separated on me, so let's get that out of there. Let's get that rubber piece out of there. Okay, a little bit more and it should start to let loose. There it goes. So as you can see, I've notched it just a little bit, but that's not enough to impact the strength. Alright, next we need to put the bushing on, and we can use a chunk of threaded pipe like this with some nuts on the end. Anything about, I don't know, this is probably a 1/2 inch rod here. And then I got some chunks of like giant washers here that you can use to press it in. But I'm a fan of the hydraulic press channel, so we're going to go ahead and use the mini hydraulic press. This one is only a 12-ton, none of that 100-ton stuff. So the new bushings, instead of the metal and the rubber combination, we've got an inner polyurethane part and an outer part. So I need to press the outer part into the bracket, and then this inner part I'm going to slide onto the control arm bushing, and then we're going to squeeze them together. So the hardest part is to get this to slide into here. I've got an old wheel bearing race that I'm going to use to keep it off the surface here, and then I'm just going to simply assemble everything. Just put it together like this, and we'll press it in. Don't worry if it goes crooked a little bit, just keep pressing and it should go in. And I'll scrunch it down just a little bit extra to get the lip on the opposite side to pop over the edge of the bracket. And that's all there is to it. It's in there. This little round disc piece slides over the control arm shaft here to protect against this rubber, these weld marks here. And it comes with silicone grease. I'm just going to squeeze some grease in here, making sure to save enough for the other side as well. You don't need a lot. We'll go ahead and squeeze this piece in, twisting as we go to distribute the grease. And we'll hammer it in. Then we'll take the control arm and just jam it on in here. And I'll put a block of wood down and pound it in the rest of the way. Now we can reinstall. It's that easy. And whatever you do, don't cross thread these bolts. Make sure that they go in by hand before you start tightening any of them. And if you remove the headlight leveling sensor bracket, don't forget to put it back in now, or you're going to have a lot of fun doing it later. Alright, now we kind of hold it up where it's supposed to be and then tighten. Make sure these are nice and tight. I'll put the torque values right here, because if they're not tight, you're going to get a clunk. Okay, so that's all there is to it for installing PowerFlex control arm bushings onto a 2002 to 2006 Mini Cooper. Assembly is the reverse of disassembly. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. And as always, I'll put a link in the description and a pinned comment with the parts and tools I use for this job. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.